Hello and welcome to Grandma's Story Room. It's time to read some more chapters out of The Wild Robot. So I am sitting in my grandma's room. I have my little cup of tea here and we are ready to go with chapter 12, which is called The Storm. I wonder what's going to happen to Roz now. Roz felt safe up on the mountaintop. So she spent the next few days and nights perched on the peak. But everything changed one afternoon when a low-lying cloud crept up the mountain and Roz found herself surrounded by white. When the world faded back into view, she noticed more clouds floating south past the island. Then she heard a deep rumble behind her, and the robot turned her head around and saw that the sky was filled with a swirling wall of darkness, and light flickered here and there were more deep rumbles. The storm was approaching, and it wasn't just any storm. It was as fierce as the one that had sent the cargo ship to the ocean floor. The wind picked up. The first drops of rain tapped against the robot. It was time to go. Roz unclamped her hands and began sliding down the peak. Here she goes. Hot sparks flew from where her body scraped against the leaning slab of stone, and soon her feet hit soil. And she was off and she was running, and the rain fell harder, and the wind blew faster, and the lightning flashed brighter, and the thunder cracked louder. And so much rainwater was falling that rushing rivers of runoff started springing up everywhere, and Roz splashed down the mountain, searching through the gloom for any kind of shelter. But she should have watched where she was going, because her heavy feet slipped and tripped, and she tumbled right into a mudslide. Our robot was helpless. The river of mud whisked her downhill, slamming her into the rocks, dragging her through the bushes, and sweeping her straight toward a cliff. Mud was pouring off the cliff like a waterfall. Roz frantically clawed at the ground, trying to hold on, grasping for anything she could, but the flow only carried her faster toward the edge. And just as she was about to plunge over, she came to a hard, sudden stop. Mud surged around her, spraying into her face, pinning her against this solid thing, and she blindly felt for her hands, and she recognized the thick roots and trunk of a pine tree. In an instant, she was pulling herself up from the branches into them. The wind whipped across the mountainside, and Roz heard the familiar thunk of pine cones pelting her body everywhere. But she didn't mind them. She was just happy to be safe from the mud flow. And the robot locked her arms and her legs around the tree and held on and waited for the storm to blow over. Chapter 13, The Aftermath. Daybreak. And the storm had passed, but the sounds of water were everywhere. The air was filled with the dripping sounds of mountain runoff and the sloshing sounds of flooded streams. And then came a very different sound. It was the clanging sound made when a robot slips on a wet rock. There were quite a few clangs that morning. As Roz worked her way downhill, she scanned the aftermath of the storm. Giant mounds of mud and debris had formed below the cliffs. The island's central river had crested its banks and spilled into the nearby fields and forests. Some trees had been uprooted. Others were submerged their heavy branches barely poking above the floodwaters, their lower branches swarming with fish instead of birds. After such a storm, you might expect to see animal corpses scattered among all the devastation. But the animals seemed to have survived just fine. Somehow they had known the storm was coming, and they had found shelter long before it rolled in. Lowland creatures who had sought refuge in higher ground were waiting patiently for the waters to recede. Deer were wading through the flooded fields. Beavers were busily collecting a trove of fallen branches. Geese honked in the sky before splashing down into the watery section of the forest. Clearly, these animals were experts at survival. Clearly, Roz, our robot, was not. Roz was crusted with mud and grit, so she gave herself another good cleaning, but that only revealed all of her little dents and scratches, and they were really starting to add up. She hardly resembled the perfect robot who had appeared on the shore just a week earlier. The wilderness was taking a toll on poor Roz. So she felt something like relief when she spotted the quiet hole in the side of the mountain. It looked like a safe place for a robot. I wonder if it is. She stomped across the hillside and up to the cave, but never stopped to wonder what might be lurking within. What do you think might have been in the cave? Next chapter, 14, the bears. Roz stomped into the cave, and then she stomped right back. Please stay away, said the robot to the two bears who were now nipping at her heels. You see, when Roz stomped into the cave, she accidentally woke a brother and sister bear from their morning nap, which is never a good idea. And to make matters worse, bears have an instinct that drives them to attack when a creature runs away, especially if the creature running away is a mysterious sparkling monster. And so the startled bears watched Roz stomping out of their cave, and they really had no choice at all. They simply had to take up the chase. Roz tried her best to outrun the bears. She leaped over rocks. She wove through trees. She stomped across the mountainside at full speed. But the bears were young, and they were strong, and they were fast, and the robot still had much to learn about moving through the wilderness. She never even saw that tree root. One moment she was stomping along, and the next moment she was flying through the air and thumping down onto a rotten log. And clumps of softwood stuck to her side as she stood and she faced her attackers. Now, wouldn't you be afraid if two bears were charging toward you? Of course you would. Everyone would. Even the robot felt something like fear. Roz was programmed to take care of herself. She was programmed to stay alive. And as the robot watched those bears charging toward her, she knew her life was in serious danger. And the bears slammed into Roz, knocking her against the trunk of a towering tree. Then one bear dove at her legs, and the other clawed at her chest. If only the robot had swung her fists or kicked her feet, she could have scared them off. One good bop on the nose would have sent them running. But the robot's programming would not allow her to be violent. Clearly, Roz was not designed to fight bears. Powerful jaws clamped at her arms. Sharp claws slashed at her face. A massive head rammed her in the chest. Please stay away, said the robot. Rrr, said the sister bear. Rrr, said the brother bear. And then the bears went in for the kill. but the robot had vanished. Do you think we should try one more chapter? The escape. Using all the strength in her legs, Roz jumped straight up. She jumped high up into the air and she landed on a tree branch overhead. And the tree shook with the sudden weight of the robot. And then thunk, thunk, 2 pine cones bounced off of Roz. And a moment later, thunk, thunk, the same pine cones bounced off the bears below. The bears grunted with annoyance, and this gave Roz an idea. I wonder what that was. The robot's programming stopped her from being violent, but nothing stopped her from being annoying. So Roz plucked pine cones from the nearby branches, and she lobbed them down at the bears. Thunk, 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 thunk. Each pine cone bounced off its target with annoying accuracy and whipped the young bears into a frenzy. See, there she is up at the top of the tree, throwing pine cones down at the bears. Roar, said Sister Bear. Roar, said Brother Bear. I do not understand you bears, said the robot. Roz was about to unload a whole armful of annoying pine cones when a distant roar echoed through the forest. Back in the cave, the mother bear was calling for these two, and she did not sound happy. The young bears looked at each other. They knew they were in trouble. But before lumbering home, they glared up at Roz, and they snorted one last time, and more than anything, they wanted to kill that robot. And that is where we are going to stop for today. And next time, we will be reading from The Pine Tree.